Welcome to the show. I'm Mike, and today's watch you're either going to love or you're going to think it never should have been made. This is an Elgin SwisSonic watch from right around 1970. It's powered by the revolutionary ESA 9154 movement that bridged the time-space continuum between spring-driven mechanical watches and electronic quartz crystal-regulated watches. What's behind the coin-operated hatch? A battery. But mechanical watch lovers, don't swipe away just yet because this watch also has a balance wheel and a hairspring. Let's take a look inside. So here's the deal. The balance wheel, which is actually two stacked wheels, has permanent magnets attached. A transistor pulses the battery power to the copper electromagnetic coils, causing the balance wheel to oscillate back and forth at a precise 28,800 beats per hour. Let's clean up some of the muck from the leaky battery, and we'll see if we can get this watch to run. I'll be doing a complete disassembly, thorough cleaning, and lubrication in this video. Even though this watch has a battery, many of the steps required to service it are the same for any type of watch. One of my favorite cleaning solvents is isopropyl alcohol, or IPA, which you will see me use frequently throughout this restoration. It's going to come up. Fortunately, the back of the case looks pretty clean. The manufacturer of the case is the ID Watch Case Company, an American company formed in the 1930s. The Elgin Watch Company is also an American watchmaker dating back to 1864. Let's see if I just ground it to case. With the crown in the in position, when the positive pole of the battery is grounded to the case, the balance torques slightly, but not strong enough to run. When you pull out the crown, the balance stop lever releases a spring-loaded switch that disconnects the battery and also stops the balance wheel from turning. This watch doesn't have a conventional setting lever screw or push button that lets you remove the winding stem to get the movement out of the case. So I'll need to remove the balance stop lever and setting lever to remove the winding stem. Since this watch doesn't wind, it's simply referred to as a hand setting stem. The only part threaded onto the stem is this hand setting pinion. This watch is not Elgin's first foray into electric or electronic watches. In 1952, they received a patent for an electronic watch movement, but their first electric watch wasn't produced until 1962. They scrapped development on their own electric movements, choosing German or Swiss-made movements like this ESA Dynotron series movement. The brand name SwisSonic is used extensively by ESA on their electronic or quartz movements, and also appears on other watch brands, including Waltham, Avia, and Mito, to name a few. This little screw holds the face or dial onto the movement, pressing on those little posts called dial feet. Unfortunately, this watch is missing one of the dial mounting screws. More on that later. Let's take a closer look at the dial or calendar side of the movement. Here's a tip that will be helpful during reassembly. All of the screw heads on this side of the movement are unpolished. We can now remove the setting wheel, which I'm checking to see if there's a top side and a bottom side. Nope, it's symmetrical. The minute wheel has a little thumb that nudges my favorite part of the movement, the date indicator driving wheel, which turns the date wheel. I can't help but think that this looks like the brush cutting attachment on my weed whacker. Please check out my brush cutting video on my other channel, link below. The date jumper is a spring-loaded lever that snaps the date indicator into the correct position when the date changes. The date jumper spring can now be slid out, taking care that it doesn't jump away. The date wheel is held in place by 3 washers attached with screws. Some of the washers were stuck, so I popped them off with hand levers, using a sheet of plastic to keep them from flying away. The date wheel, like the dial, can easily be scratched, so I remove it with care and store it in a safe place. The third wheel bridge holds the jewel for the top pivot of the third wheel, and also keeps the cannon pinion with its attached driving wheel in place. Flipping over to the balance side of the movement, where all of the screws have polished heads, we can remove the train wheel bridge, which secures the gears, or in watchmaker speak, wheels, that drive the watch hands. There's an interesting feature under the bridge, these 2 whisker-like wires called friction springs, which rest in nylon guides on 2 of the wheels. Before reassembling the movement, we'll need to reposition these springs before we reinstall the bridge. Let's get the third wheel out of the way and turn our attention to removing the electronic circuit board. These clamp-type movement holders can be finicky at times.
Mother, father. Hey, look at that!
The wheel that fell out is called the click wheel in this watch, which is the equivalent of the escape wheel in a mainspring-powered watch. Here's a good look at the nylon friction guide I mentioned a moment ago. With the screws removed, the circuit board and coil can be slid out from the stacked balance wheel. Here's a tip I learned during reassembly. If you leave the circuit board on this post, it acts as a pivot to swing the circuit board away. The circuit insulator can now be removed. I'll repair the damaged section later in the video. With the circuit board and coil removed, we can easily remove the balance and inspect it. The permanent magnets are on the left and the brass-colored counterweight is on the right. In the center of the balance wheel, you can see a traditional roller table and impulse jewel. On mainspring-powered watches, this part is called the pallet fork or anchor. On this watch, it's called the click lever. Most of us are used to the escape wheel being powered by the mainspring through the train of wheels, and the pallet fork moving as a result. Since in this watch the balance wheel is the power source, the click lever pushes on the click wheel, moving the train of wheels, which is kind of reverse physics. The final part to come off the movement is the sweep second wheel, with a post for the second hand on one side and a nylon friction wheel on the other. If you're new to watchmaking, you'll definitely want to purchase some pegwood early on. Pegwood is made from dried orange wood and is perfect for pre-cleaning pivot holes once you've disassembled your watch movement. With a sharp knife, create a point with facets, which will dislodge caked-on dirt and dried oil. I've remounted the balance assembly to the main plate to protect it during cleaning. With a puff of air from my dust blower, here are some high-speed macro shots showing it in motion. The disassembled watch parts are now ready for cleaning. I'm transferring everything that will be washed in the ultrasonic cleaner to these brass and stainless steel baskets, sorted by size. You don't want to have heavier parts come into contact with fragile parts during the cleaning process. I won't be putting the pallet fork, click lever, through the ultrasonic because the heat may soften the shellac holding in the ruby pallet stones. The watch case and crystal will be washed separately. We'll move on to the cleaning area in a moment. Right now I want to address the battery access cover, which is frozen to the watch back. I tried multiple coins and washers to remove the hatch, but it wouldn't budge, and I didn't want to damage the slot any more than it already was. I applied WD-40 penetrating oil to both sides of the battery cover and let it soak overnight, but it still wouldn't budge. Several videos ago I removed a stuck watch back by crazy gluing a nut to the back, which gave me an idea. What if I crazy glued a coin into the slot and then tried to turn it? It's worth a try. Since crazy glue sets up best when clamped, I used my pan of ice to hold the coin in place and set it aside for 24 hours to cure.
A little flat side here, which is good for broad areas. Crystal's not too bad. Do you know what time it is? It's PolyWatch time. I love PolyWatch. So I'm just going to take a little piece of Rodico and just sort of stick it right there. We're going to use that to elevate the crystal, keep it from sliding around. We just apply a dab of the polish. Using a clean cotton cloth. This is just t-shirt material. And we get the center and we get the edges. And when the liquid in the PolyWatch polish evaporates off, I just flip to another part of the cloth and I buff. And as you can see, it's quite transparent. I'd say it's going to be usable.
Time to try to remove the battery hatch door. I clamped the case back using a nut as a shim so I wouldn't bend the rim by squeezing it. Fingers crossed.
No!
Bummer.
We have failure. Oh, look at that.
I'm going to soak the glue off in acetone and I'll need to come up with a better solution.
Throw a lid on that and we'll set it aside. Okay, this is my cleaning setup, and I've added the main plate to this basket. I'm using L&R ultrasonic cleaning solutions. I have 3 jars in an ultrasonic machine. And the first jar is cleaning solution, followed by rinsing solution, followed by another rinsing solution. I'm going to preheat everything to 49 degrees Celsius. We start out in the clean jar, and this gets a 5-minute ultrasonic cycle. We then move that over to the rinse cycle for another 5 minutes, and then we move it over to the final rinse cycle for the final 5-minute rinse. When it comes out of the final rinse, I'll open up the little capsules and distribute the parts in these glass petri dishes, where I will then place it underneath this warm air blower, which will dry the parts. We're back. Super Glue, Chapter 2.
I decided that crazy glue was still an option, but I needed more surface area to get a better bond. I found an appropriately sized nut and used my watch press to clamp it together while the glue dried.
There we go. And we will put this aside to dry.
Before reassembly, there are 2 jewels on either side of the balance staff that need to be removed, cleaned, oiled, and reinstalled. They are held in place by a tiny shock spring. which protects the delicate pivots on the balance wheel from damage if the watch is dropped or otherwise impacted. The jewels get rinsed in a solvent called One-Dip, which quickly dissolves away old oil and grime. I'll also use this time to clean the watch part formerly known as a pallet fork, evaporating off any excess solvent using my dust blower. The jewels are removed from the solvent and rubbed with pegwood to ensure that both sides are clean. I'll apply a single drop of my lightest watchmaking oil, Mobius 9010, to the flat side of the cap jewel. Then the whole jewel is carefully placed on top of the oiled cap jewel, where, if nested correctly, surface tension will hold them together. The cleaned and oiled assembly is then placed back in the shock mount, with the whole side facing the balance pivot, and the shock spring is locked into place. The movement is then flipped over, and the process is repeated for the other balance jewel. The lubricated balance assembly is now put safely aside until later. It's time to assemble the train of wheels, and the tension springs on the train wheel bridge need to be staged against this post to keep them out of the way. Hindsight is 20/20. I only did this to one spring, but I recommend crisscrossing both springs to make installation easier later on. The order doesn't matter. I'm applying lightweight oil to the staff of the sweep second wheel. I moved the click wheel into position and tried to position the third wheel. When I tried installing the bridge, I realized that without a jewel holding the other side of the third wheel pivot, everything was flopping around.
There's no pivot on the other side of this part yet.
So I removed the wheels, flipped the movement over, and attached the third wheel bridge. I could have installed the cannon pinion at the same time, but that's okay. I can adjust for it later on in the assembly.
Hey, that actually feels like the right screw. Back to the other side. So now we have that jewel hole that we could drop that wheel into. So we need to go under, find the jewel on the bottom. Yeah, there we go. We're in. Let's try again with that bridge plate.
With a pivot in place for the other side of the third wheel, it was much easier getting everything aligned and putting on the train wheel bridge. Any time you're putting pivots into pivot holes, you run the risk of damaging the pivot if you're too forceful. Take your time, and don't force things. Let gravity drop things into place when it can.
Let's just take a peek.
Make sure you test fit frequently, and by all means, check your work with a loupe or through the microscope before tightening parts down. It's time to put the whisker-like friction springs into the nylon guide wheels. Since I didn't crisscross both springs, here I am retrieving the spring for the sweep second wheel. The spring for the click wheel was much easier to access since it was sitting on the post. Next, I lubricated the jewels for all the train wheel pivots on both sides of the movement and ensured that everything was running smoothly. I put medium weight oil on the center pipe for the cannon pinion and spread some extra oil on the sliding surfaces that will touch the driving wheel. Too much oil?
Clean up, aisle 5.
Not a problem. Rodico to the rescue. I removed the third wheel bridge, put the cannon pinion in place, making sure the teeth of the driving wheel were engaged with the pinion on the third wheel, and then replaced the bridge. It's time to reassemble the calendar works, which set and change the date. I'm going to use my heavy blue grease, Mobius 9501, before putting the date indicator driving wheel in place. This is a slow-moving, high-torque part, and the blue grease should stand the test of time. I'm also applying grease directly to the sliding surfaces of this spring-loaded arm that engages the teeth on the inside of the calendar wheel.
There we go. Okay, now we can exercise that spring, and now we can safely do a cleanup without pulling off the part.
I'm adding some tiny dots of grease to the back of the calendar wheel to the places where I think it will make contact. If the calendar works in a watch do not run smoothly, the extra torque required to turn over the date can actually stop a watch from running. You'll know if your watch has this problem because it will probably stop running at midnight. Of course, you don't want to overoil, so clean up any excess as you go. Next, we'll install the date jumper, taking care to lubricate where it makes contact with the main plate and the date ring.
Okay, and he pivots freely. Wick a little bit of this grease behind that screw. I could have put some on there before putting the screw in. The date wheel is held in place with these washers. One of them has concentric circles on it. And he goes, I believe, right here. Okay, good.
The date jumper spring can now be slid into place. I gripped it with my tweezers and used a pointy pegwood to control it, and slid it under the jumper lever and the date ring washer, compressing the hook of the spring in its cutout on the main plate. Here's a look at a few different angles of the minute wheel. I'm lubricating its post and where it makes contact with the main plate, plus paying attention to where the thumb-shaped actuator makes contact with the date indicator driving wheel. I'm being generous with the grease, and I'll circle back later and clean up whatever's not needed. Here are a couple of close-ups of how the minute wheel engages those saw teeth on the date driving wheel every time it makes a full revolution.
Got him.
Next, we will drop the setting wheel into place. I'm holding it on a piece of Rodico to make it easier to apply an equal amount of lubricant to both pivots. It's time to attach the minute work cover plate, which will hold the minute wheel and setting wheel in place.
Yeah, I think we have the calendar works all buttoned up on this project.
As you saw earlier, the circuit insulator was damaged when the old mercury battery leaked. After cleaning it with isopropyl alcohol, you can see that the film is significantly thinner, which has me concerned that this area could fail in the future.
Let's see if this heat tape is conductive. See if there's any resistance here. Nope. What about on the adhesive side?
It's not, so I'm going to use it to reinforce the damaged part of the circuit board insulator.
There you go. There's our repaired insulator. This is a very simple circuit. Several components on the back. This is the switch that gets engaged when you pull out the stem. Visually, it looks like everything's in good shape here. And let's just confirm that we have continuity on the circuits in the back. So continuity will give us a beep down to here, to here. We should not have continuity here. Good, we don't. That's the switch. Next thing we want to do is check resistance between the two coils. So first test, 2.11 kiloohms. That's good. It's bad if it's either open or a short circuit. Hopefully we'll see a similar reading between these two terminals. 2.25 kiloohms. Excellent. The resistance between the different sides of the coil are within acceptable range and they're similar to each other. So I have to assume at this point that the electronics are good.
Hey, remember our stuck battery hatch? What do you say we give it a try? It's had lots of time to cure.
It's on there. Come on. Oh! Hey, it's turning. See that? Look at that. All right. And there it is. It was just really, 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 really stuck. We'll scrape off this gasket and we'll do a little soak in acetone to break the crazy glue free.
As I've mentioned, the documentation for this movement refers to the pallet fork as the click lever. Interestingly, they use the familiar name for what holds it in place, which is the pallet cock. Since the balance wheel has permanent magnets, it needs to be inspected for any magnetic debris like metal shavings before reassembling the watch. If there's anything on the magnets, you can gently remove it with the adhesive on a post-it note. Yay, it's finally time to reinstall the balance wheel. I'm testing with my air blower as the balance cock and pivots settle into place, but with the screw tightened down, the balance wheel wasn't bouncing freely. I used the microscope to ensure that the dial side pivot was in place. But something looked off with the balance cock jewel, so I removed it from the shock mount. I must have messed something up because the cap jewel had come off and the pivot wasn't riding in the hole jewel. I removed the jewels, cleaned and re-oiled them, and placed them back in their mount, and that fixed the problem. Happy balance. Let's get the circuit board in place. The insulator goes in first, taking care to match the cutouts to the main plate. With the circuit board pivoting on the short post at the top of the screen, you can swing the coils into place between the two balance wheels.
That's looking pretty good.
The circuit board gets screwed into place with the shorter screw in the pivoting hole and the longer screws in the green plastic coil rest. Test the balance throughout this process to make sure it's still swinging freely. Before reattaching the negative battery power connection, I noticed some corrosion around the conductive screw hole.
Yeah, look at that.
So I loosened it with my tweezers and carefully picked up the debris with some Rodico, taking care not to blow the dirt into the movement. The springy battery connector didn't want to go back into place, so I applied some fingertip pressure while I got the screws started.
I'm really dying to find out if we got this running.
Since the watch battery relies on the case to complete the circuit, I will temporarily ground the top of the battery to one of the screws that's attached to the main plate. With another pair of tweezers, I will short the spring-loaded switch that closes when the winding stem is in the in or running position.
And now let's see if I contact this and this. Oh, it bounced. Wait. Oh, look at that. It's going. Look at it go. I had no idea it would beat so strong. I'm very, very happy right now. Okay, let's let go there. Let's let go there. I'll get this battery out of there. That, my friends, is what makes watchmaking so rewarding.
I want to replace the rubber gasket in the crown, so I'm holding the winding stem in a pin vise. While I eventually got it out with tweezers and a straight pin,
Keeps going like a snail back into his shell.
In hindsight, I would have had better access to the gasket if I had first unscrewed the winding stem from the crown. In the workshop, I powered up my mini bench grinder and gave the case a light polishing, being careful not to rub through the gold electroplating. After polishing, the case and the watch crown were washed in warm soapy water in my small ultrasonic cleaner.
Hey, do you want to see something kind of funny? So this is the set of replacement crown gaskets. It's all nicely sorted and everything, but check this out. Look at the lid. Ha! Static electricity.
Here's a look inside the cleaned up crown. I selected this gasket as the replacement, not a perfect match, but I think it will work. With a dab of silicone paste on the gasket, I'll slide it over the stem and press it into the crown, being careful not to damage it. While we're in gasket mode, I will size and replace the O-ring on the battery hatch. This 12mm gasket looks like it will be a good fit. The blue container has 2 sponges that evenly apply silicone to both sides of the gasket at once.
It is in the groove.
Before installing the winding stem, I will apply my heavy grease to the hand setting pinion. The winding stem also gets grease where it meets other metal parts, or on this watch makes contact with the circuit board. I used my tweezers to help slide the setting pinion into place on the stem, and I applied extra grease for good measure where the setting lever will make contact. When deciding where to add lubrication, you can temporarily put a part in place to visualize the path it takes when it moves. These shouldered screws let you tighten down fully and provide the perfect amount of clearance so the setting lever can slide freely. The balance stop lever performs multiple tasks and is a little tricky to get into place. I found the best way to install it is to sit it on top of the spring-loaded switch with the stem in the out or setting position and engage the first few threads of the screw. The lever is then rotated clear of the spring switch, engaging the downward post with the 2 recesses on the sliding setting lever, and tightening the screw just enough to hold it in place. Then the round end of the lever can be compressed against the spring switch while you tighten the screw down fully. When properly fastened, the spring switch will compress and close the contact. When the stem is pulled out, the spring will release and the switch will open, and the spring arm will move over the balance wheel, which brings it to a stop when it's bouncing.
We're on the dial side, and let's pull it out to the setting mode. So you can see that date advancer. That disc spins based on this wheel and that little cog that's underneath there. So as that wheel comes around again, that little tooth should grab the calendar wheel, move it 1 number. This watch has a quick set date. When you get to midnight, you go back to like 11 o'clock, and then you turn it forward. And then to move it again, you go back, and then you move it forward. There's no pushing and pulling. You don't have to spin it around 24 hours.
Time to get the dial in place so we can install the hands. I'll start by loosening the 1 remaining dial foot screw. That's the hole the dial foot goes into.
See, that's where the other dial screw went. That's missing.
I'll put 2 drops of medium weight oil on the cannon pinion before installing the hour wheel.
There was no dial washer in this watch. No dial washer, and of course it was missing one of those dial foot screws.
With the dial in place and the dial foot screw tightened down, we can turn our attention to cleaning the hands before installing them. I'm using this pen that's intended for cleaning camera lenses and has a microfiber pad on one end. The second hand is painted, so I'm gently wiping it to remove any grime and hopefully not remove any paint. The holes in the steel staking block help keep the hand in place as I polish it. Before pressing on the hands, I will turn over the date indicator to the exact moment that the next number clicks into place. I can now install the hands in the midnight position so the date changes at exactly 12 a.m. When installing the hands, you need to check that they're parallel to the face of the watch, parallel but not touching each other, and are not hitting the hour indices or the dial. Unfortunately, I didn't seat the hour hand down far enough, so I'm going to have to back up and get a fresh start.
Oh, look at that. Separation is wafer thin.
That's looking better. But then I started having intermittent clearance problems.
Yep, see what happened? I push it down a little bit. Now it's hitting. Drat, it's hitting that index.
I tried tweaking the minute hand, but the problem returned.
The dial. And that damn dial screw. That's what's going on. That's why it's hitting.
The unfastened side of the dial was popping up and interfering with the hands.
I'm going to need to find a dial screw.
I searched my screw collection, and this is the closest size dial screw I could find. Here's the problem. The dial screws in this watch are threaded much coarser than all the other Swiss watches I've been working on. In fact, all of the screws in this watch have a similar coarse thread. Instead of ordering the correct part or attaching the dial with sticky tape, I was determined to keep the project going by attempting a crazy watchmaking stunt. Before getting to the craziness, you should know that I found and installed a spare dial washer, and I tried moving the existing dial foot screw to the other mounting position to see if that would be stable. It was no better. I found some stainless steel wire that snugly fit the dial foot screw hole. With the wire in place, the dial foot was held securely. I marked the wire and trimmed it to an appropriate length, and then reseated it in the screw hole. For insurance, I applied removable Loctite thread locker using an old oiler, letting the adhesive wick into the gaps.
There we go, capillary action.
While this might not be the ideal solution, it kept the project moving forward, and it's completely reversible.
Nice.
With the dial now securely in place, I installed the hands, and everything is looking good.
That'll work.
Let's install the crystal so we can recase the watch. This crystal lifter works by compressing an acrylic crystal by the edges just enough to snap it into the case. This holder lets you get a grip with a little bit of the crystal sticking out so you can center it in the case opening. The black hand screw tightens the metal fingers, uniformly reducing the diameter of the crystal.
We should be able to drop the crystal into place.
Unfortunately, the domed crystal didn't want to cooperate, and I wasn't comfortable applying too much force. This will be my last attempt.
So as soon as we release that, it does nothing. I have a small die here, and then I have a larger die with a recess on the top.
There's a tool called a rober press, specifically designed to install acrylic crystals. I'm going to use my traditional watch press to basically simulate how a rover press works. The watch case is placed below the two press dies. When the crystal is pressed down, the large outer die and small inner die flex the crystal inward, slightly reducing the diameter enough to lift the watch case into place. When tension is released, the crystal expands, seating it securely.
Okay. How did we do? I think we did it. Should have started out with that method, huh?
Before putting the movement in the case, I'll attach the second hand. I need to remove the setting lever to free the stem. I wonder if I can sneak it out of the way without removing the balance stop lever. I fiddled it in a few directions and came to the conclusion that the stop lever will have to come out.
That comes off. That slides free. Cleaned case.
When the movement is aligned, you can reinsert the hand setting stem. Here I'm testing the fit of the new crown gasket. This case ring spacer drops into place and keeps the movement centered in the case. And now the balance stop lever can be reinstalled. I'm installing a fresh 32mm gasket that will seal the watch case to the back.
Little notch.
With the index between the case and the back aligned, I'll place the watch on my press. I've selected a lower die that only makes contact with the case and has clearance for the crystal so we don't break it.
Firm. Firm. There we go. Okay.
Final step, checking the hands and date functionality.
Call it 135.
And we are off and running. 22 hours, 19 minutes, and 7 seconds later, and it's time to see how it's running. The timegrapher has a microphone that listens to the beats of the watch and can detect how many seconds a day the watch is gaining or losing, how strong it's beating, called amplitude, and whether the balance is bouncing back and forth evenly, which is called beat error. In the dial up position, the watch is gaining 20 seconds per day. Amplitude is strong at 260, and the beat error is a reasonable 0.5. When you regulate a watch, you want consistent performance in a variety of positions. With the crown pointing up, the watch is gaining a very consistent 21 seconds per day. Crown left, we are at plus 18 seconds. Overall, the numbers in different positions are very similar, which is a good sign.
So let's talk about regulation. We want to slow down the watch. So to slow down the watch means to lengthen the hairspring by moving that guide pin in that direction. There's a little cog right down here that rotates. As it turns clockwise, the diameter is reduced, meaning that resting point should move in that direction. Why don't I just do it a little bit at first? You see that tooth there? I'm going to make that tooth point to here. Let's see if I can turn it that finely. I'm going to go one more because that seemed so slight. There we go.
To regulate the watch while it was on the timegrapher, I removed the back and held the battery in place, completing the circuit with my tweezers like we did earlier. Notice the curve on the timegrapher as the balance builds momentum before settling in. Hey, plus 5 seconds a day, not bad. Look at that, it's still going even without a battery. I have to say this watch was a breeze to regulate, and after about 5 tries, I had it just about perfect.
Okay. I hope the camera's getting this. Okay, I'm happy with that. Yeah, look at it go.
Well, time sure flies when you're having fun, and I can't believe we're at the end of this project. I put the watch on a red leather band which matches the painted tip of the second hand, and I've been wearing it and loving it. Whether you're an experienced watchmaker, someone who is new to the hobby, or just someone who likes to watch along, I hope you had fun too, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say in the comments below. I'm Mike. Be good, be well, and be safe, and I look forward to our next time together.